Hey y'all, how are you doing? I'm great. Thank you so much for asking. It's me, Kim, and I'm back for another video. This video is a conversation with Drew Dixon. Now, let me tell you about how Drew and I hooked up. About a month ago, I watched this documentary on HBO Max called On the Record.
Every woman's story deserves to be heard.
I've been a victim for 22 years. I'm tired of being a victim.
I think I first heard about it because Oprah was initially attached to it. She was a producer and she was going to put it on Apple TV and all that. It was going to be a big deal. She actually ended up withdrawing her support for the documentary.
I stand in support of these women. I believe them. It was a hard decision because I knew that Russell Simmons had started publicly pressuring me and that me pulling out of the documentary was going to look like I was being pressured.
For reasons that are a little sketch, but we'll get into that later. We'll get into it. But the documentary is actually about a number of women who accuse Russell Simmons, famed record executive, founder of Def Jam Records, of sexual assault. Now, before we go any further, I have to say that I'm going to be talking about sexual assault in a particular way at this point because Kimberly cannot afford to be sued, okay? I have been legally advised that if Kimberly doesn't want to be sued, we have to use certain verbiage and language. So that's what I'm going to do, but y'all know. Y'all know. Okay. So much of that documentary centers on the story of Drew Dixon. Drew Dixon was the former vice president of A&R at Arista Records. She worked as a director of A&R at Def Jam with Russell Simmons. She's produced so many classic songs for people like Mary J. Blige, Method Man, Carlos Santana, Whitney Houston, Aretha Franklin, Lauryn Hill, Deborah Cox, Montel Jordan, Q-Tip. The list goes on and on and on. Put in Estelle, put in Kanye. The woman's resume is unassailable. That's what makes this so freaking tragic. But now she has started her own independent record label called The Ninth Floor. She has her own new beauty startup called Everything Did. She went to Stanford. She went to Harvard. I mean, really, she's coming back in a major way. So I appreciate her for sitting to talk to me about race and gender, about how Black media fails victims of sexual assault, how it is so common for Black media outlets like The Breakfast Club, like Tidal, to give known abusers, like not even alleged, known predators, these huge platforms. What does that do for our culture? What does that do for Black women and girls? Well, really anybody who experiences sexual assault. We really got into it. She was so generous with her time. She told her story in such a compelling way. Oh, this was so good. Here it is. Before we really get into it, I am a music nerd ever since I was a little kid. And when I was doing my research on you, I saw that you had your hand in so many iconic music projects. Like, your resume is crazy.
I tried my hardest. I really did try to, make or influence or help to make as many great records as I could that sort of, I thought, reflected just the beauty and the swag of who we are, Black folks, but also kind of connecting our sound in collaborations with artists like Carlos Santana as well, who's so soulful anyway. So yeah, that was my mission and my pleasure and my privilege. So I'm glad I was able to make a difference and make a mark.
Okay, I just want to talk about, because you gave Nobody's Supposed to Be Here, which Montel Jordan wrote to Deborah Cox.
Right. Montel and Shep Crawford wrote that song. Yep. And Montel and his wife, Kristen, brought it to me at Arista.
I used to love that song. Like, it came out when I was, I don't know, maybe 9 or 10. I loved it so much that my sister is 8 years older than me. And I wanted to give her the CD single, yes, kids, CD single, for her birthday. It was so popular that I went to the record store and the CD singles were sold out. So I had to get her something else.
Wow, that's amazing to me. That song is, I'm so proud of that record. It's, I'm from DC, and so I grew up listening to The Quiet Storm, WHUR, as well as KYS and PGC, but Luther, Anita, Patti LaBelle, that's what was playing in my household. And that record felt like that to me. And I played it for Clive Davis, my boss, who's a legend. And he actually heard it for Faith Evans, who was signed to Bad Boy, which was our partner label. And I really fought for him to give it to Deborah because I thought, I mean, obviously Faith can sing to the ground, but Deborah has amazing pipes and hadn't really broken through. And something told me this was her record. And so Clive ultimately agreed, and we played it for Deborah. And then Montel and Shep went in. And then we also cut another song that Montel brought me, which was We Can't Be Friends, which we cut as a duet with RL.
So good. Like, this is like amazing to me. You also had the idea to put with Kanye on American Boy by Estelle.
Yes. So after I quit the industry, after, what happened with Russell, and then I dusted myself off, and then I encountered just chronic harassment with LA Reid. And I really felt like the whole thing was pointless, and I was kidding myself to think I would ever be taken seriously no matter how many hits I had. It was always going to come back to this sort of ridiculous toll keeper, gatekeeper, quid pro quo thing. I left and I came back briefly to run John Legend's label. John and I had been in touch after I tried to sign him and wasn't able to. He had a new label. He'd signed this amazing artist named Estelle. He thought the record was done. I was like, I don't think it's done. And we went in with will.i.am and Wyclef and Swizz and a bunch of other producers. And American Boy was one of the records that Estelle and Will and John made. And we were waiting on tracks from Kanye, like original tracks, because he wanted to produce for Estelle as well, but he was so busy. And so ultimately I was like, guys, why don't we just forget the original Kanye song, which is going to just take forever because he means well, but he's just too busy, and just get him to drop 16 bars on the record we have that's already a hit. And Kanye was like, cool, I'll do it. He wrote to it, but then he was so busy that it was hard to find time even for that. But then my old assistant from Arista worked at Universal, which is where he was signed, and she had his promo schedule. And she's like, he's going to be on the ground for 36 hours in a couple of days. I was like, great. We're sending him a car. We brought him to platinum. He dropped 48 bars, like killed it at the top of the record. And then we split it into two pieces. And, the rest is history. It was just an incredible, incredible collab. And it was great to be able to make a record with Kanye after having tried to sign him. So just to be in the lab with him, just like for a moment, was just like kind of a full circle moment for me. And Estelle is just so dope, and Kanye loved her. And it was just like all love.
Yes. These are like incredible songs. That Kanye part on American Boy is so good. Like, I mean, no matter how we feel about him today. Okay.
Right.
Yeah. So I mentioned this because you had the ear, clearly. You had the talent. I mean, there's no denying that you were a rising star in the music industry before you decided to step away from the industry because of the sexual harassment that you were experiencing.
Yeah, right. I mean, there was an expression, some people have ears, some people don't. It's really kind of a God-given talent. And I just always did, even as a kid, I would make mixtapes back when cassettes were a thing, like long before your time. And the things on my mixtapes would end up being hits, 18 months later. I just, without trying, I just sort of had this sense of it. And then I learned it. I studied it as a craft. When I was answering phones as an intern, I really would like listen to albums, even albums I didn't like, that had hits on it, and really try to understand what makes this record a hit. So it's not just purely feeling, it was some understanding of like the aerodynamics of a hit, like how does it take off and stay in the air? And, I had natural ears, and then I studied it, and then I just worked really hard at it, and then I just had a passion for it. And I had this, history of having been in the hip hop world. And then I was suddenly in this big building at a major with Clive, and I was able to connect all of my old hip hop friends, or as much of them as I possibly could, with these big pop artists to make records like My Love Is Your Love and, Nobody's Supposed to Be Here and A Rose Is Still a Rose and Marie Maria and, those kinds of records, which, I definitely had the gift. I loved it with all my heart and soul, and I never could understand why I couldn't get pulled into the room where it really happens. Like I was in the room with Clive, but I could never get sort of pulled up to that level of peer. And it was just, I realized ultimately it's because I'm a woman, They're going to objectify me. They want to appropriate me. They want to like claim me, you know, and they won't just let me live. They just won't let me be their peer. And it was just devastating. It was devastating. So I gave up.
And the Clive that you are referring to is Clive Davis, legendary record executive responsible for Whitney Houston's career, Alicia Keys, like
Family Stone, Bruce Springsteen, Janis Joplin. Oh, I mean, he's just extraordinary, and making also so many major executives also launching their careers. So yeah, Clive, it gets no bigger than Clive.
So I watched the On the Record documentary where you and several other women document your experiences of sexual assault with Russell Simmons, who used to be the head of Def Jam Records. And I found it to be really, really compelling. How did you get involved with that?
Wow. So that was just sort of a serendipitous experience. Also kind of a function of, you know, the fact that I still sort of occupy, I understand, like a uniquely privileged position, even sort of as a stay-at-home mom. My kids went to or go to a private school where one of the moms in my daughter's grade is an amazing documentary filmmaker, and her husband executive produces documentaries. And, you know, I mean, to me, they're like, you know, Amelia's parents, right? But we were talking about Me Too, and I mentioned sort of very in passing that I had a Me Too story about Russell Simmons. I mean, like very much like just as a mom to mom, you know. And then Liz, the mom I mentioned it to, told me that her husband was executive producing a Me Too doc, and asked me if I would be willing to talk to the director about being covered as I even contemplated coming forward with my story. And that was really hard because I hadn't even gotten to the point of deciding to come forward. At the time, my husband did not want me to come forward. We'd had a very difficult sort of past couple of years, and we're just starting to emerge from that. And he didn't want to like upset the apple cart all over again for the kids and for us. But I was really struggling with leaving these other women hanging. You know, as I learned, there were more women and it wasn't just me. That was really an issue for me. If it was just me taking it for the team, I could live with that. But if there were other women who needed me to get their back, that was not something I could live with. If I just sort of was like, you know. So the filmmakers were already in touch with me as I was at this early stage of even thinking about going to the New York Times. And I agreed, you know, I agreed to let them come show up in my living room with a camera. And, you know, I didn't sign the release for a really long time. They said, you know what, if you change your mind, we'll burn the footage. You don't have to commit, but we can't obviously unscramble the egg. We can't go back in time if you do decide to do it. And to be completely honest with you, I was afraid of Russell and L.A. Reid. And I thought, well, you know, worst case scenario, if something bad should happen before I even get to the point where I decide, because they're really powerful and they're really rich and I'm not, you know, at least somebody will know maybe what happened and why. And I'm not accusing anybody of anything. I'm not saying anything bad did happen, but it was like this fear. They feel so powerful to me. And just having somebody with a camera in my living room, you know, like, you know, in the beginning, it was really just like one person, made me feel a little bit like, you know, if I should trip and fall, you know, mysteriously, at least somebody will maybe be able to connect the dots here. So that gave me a sense of comfort, you know, and that's why I agreed. And then they shifted their focus over time to wanting to focus primarily on my story. And I introduced them to 3 other of the Russell Simmons survivors. And, you know, I still hadn't signed the release. And then I panicked. I really freaked out. I freaked out about not just being a small part of a Me Too documentary, but being more of a central figure in a Me Too documentary about a Black icon with white directors, just to be completely honest with you. And I was like, I don't know about that. Like, I was trying to maybe be like the you know, representation for our community in their bigger Me Too story, not centered in, you know, framed by the white gaze, which with all due respect, I don't know that I had confidence that they understood the nuances and what I was really being asked to do. And the stakes for us as Black people And so then I like said no. And, you know, I didn't sign the release at that point. And I was like mean to them. I was like, go away. Like, honestly, like, really, I don't, you know. And then they started looking for a Black executive producer, and they started doing their own homework about what I was describing as my fear. They started reading, you know, Kimberly Crenshaw, and, you know, started sending me Shanita Hubbard's articles. And it really built my trust in them. I'm like, wow, they're listening to me. They really aren't playing. And maybe this could be this opportunity. Suddenly, I don't know how I ended up in the middle of this story, but maybe there's a moment in time where we can actually hold space for 90 minutes to talk about the way Black women and girls in this country have never been safe a day in our lives. Our story in this country, before we got to this country, began with rape. We lost our bodily autonomy in the transatlantic slave trade. And we've really never fully gotten it back because, you know, nobody clutches their pearls for us. The Black community took Clarence Thomas's side, not Anita Hill's side. You know, I'm very clear about where we stand as Black women on the totem pole. And I thought, you know what? I don't know how this ended up being somehow like part of my life story, is the opposite of what I was trying to make my story. But maybe this is God, and I have this moment where if I just stand here and am brave, these filmmakers who are really good at what they do will hold space to center the story of Black women. And then I introduced them to Joan Morgan, and I introduced them to Kierna. And I really started to understand that, you know, I know the term ally is a complicated term, but that they really were using their privilege to shine a light on really just the vulnerability, the plunder of Black women. And I didn't know if that opportunity would ever come again. And I didn't think I could live with myself knowing how close we were to that possibility. And then they told me that Oprah Winfrey had seen the footage and wanted to join as the executive producer. And I was like, okay, look at God. Okay, I cannot have imagined a better partner. This is a Black woman. This is a survivor. She has used her platform to advance so many difficult conversations. And now I feel safe. And that's kind of where I was like, okay, all right, let's go. Obviously, it didn't work out that way, but she was involved for 7 months in making decisions about the content, which is really kind of what got me across the finish line in terms of like signing the release and, okay, I trust this process. And then I had to find a different level of strength when she left. And I, you know, again, went back to, this is bigger than me. This is bigger than her. This is bigger than these filmmakers. This is God. This is the universe. This is whatever you want to call something divine. And I'm going to just hold my ground here, and I'm going to just keep going. And that's really what we did as the survivors in the film. And I'm just grateful we're still here. I'm grateful this film survived. I'm grateful you saw it, you know, and that's how it all happens.
Yeah. So this is so important because there are these narratives about women who are accusing really, really powerful people of sexual assault. You're just doing it for the clout. You want a book deal. You want whatever. But the concerns that you mentioned about people following you or harassing, like that is really legitimate. If you hear the stories of the people who Harvey Weinstein assaulted, they were trailed. And even Ronan Farrow talks about this in his book, Catch and Kill. Like people were out after him. Like that's real.
It's scary. It's real. The consequences of coming forward with this kind of an allegation, revealing this level of a crime against men this powerful, you know, their incentive to silence us is enormous, and their resources to silence us are enormous. And, you know, I was, you know, stay-at-home mom trying to start a company at the time. You know, I'd still like to get back to this company. It was in-home hair care solutions for our textures. It's called Everything Did. You know, I was trying to do my thing. I was trying to move on with my life. And I really was terrified. And I really just did it because I couldn't live with myself if I didn't. It's not so much that I wanted to do it as much as I couldn't live with not doing it. You know, it was like that. It was the double negative. Like, I can't not do it. You know,
You know, so this started before or after the New York Times article?
The filmmakers were connected with me before I decided to go on the record in the New York Times. So the same filmmaker mom who introduced me to the directors also happened to know Jodi Kantor at the New York Times. And that's how she knew I was considering it. Because when we were talking about Me Too just casually, and I alluded to a Russell experience, and really she just said, I think we're just scratching the surface. And I said, oh, I know we are. This was actually a Twitter DM. And she said, I know we are. And she said, how do you know? And I said, oh, hashtag Me Too. And she said, really? And it was a Brett Ratner, Russell Simmons article that we were DMing about. And she said, Brett Ratner? And I said, no, Russell Simmons. She said, really? And then like the next night, there happened to be a parents' night, and we were talking about it. And she said, well, you know, I know Jodi Kantor at the New York Times. I said, oh, wow, that's amazing. But I don't want to tell her. I don't want anyone to know. I was just telling you, like, as a friend, like, you know, I'm not trying to be I'm not trying to be Desiree Washington. I'm not trying to be Anita Hill. I'm not trying to be any of that. No. Nope. Hard pass. Nope. You know, so, and I don't want to create a headline, you know, about a Black man who's dangerous and violent and a sexual predator, because I have a Black son, and I don't need to do anything that's going to add the fuel to the fire of people that are going to profile my son and my cousins and my nephews and my brothers and my family and the men I love. We already know they have targets in their back. You need look no further, not just than the Central Park Five. If you're Black, you need to look no further than the people you know. And, you know, how we've all been pulled over when we've all been pulled over. We all know what this is like. And, you know, I didn't want to give any power to that story for innocent Black men and boys. And I didn't want to be associated with that story either. I didn't want that to be the thing people think of when they Google me. I just didn't want any part of it. There was nothing good about it. I'd reinvented myself as this, you know, I'd gone to business school, I'd gotten married and had kids, and it looked really great on paper. The Christmas card was on fleek. You know, maybe I wasn't really my fullest, happiest self for the other 364 days of the year, but my Christmas card was great. I was good. I was going to keep it moving. I didn't need this. I didn't want this. But what really pushed me over the edge is he called the other women liars. He called them liars. He invoked yoga and veganism, and he said he was incapable of violence. He was violent with me. It was a fight. It was a straight up and down fight. It was a physical fight that I lost. Okay. And it was a violent struggle. Like, I fought with all of my might. Okay. I left it all on the field and I lost. There was no gray area. This was a physical, like, wrestling with everything I had fight. And he said those women were liars, and he said he did yoga, and he said that he was incapable of hurting anyone. And it really infuriated me. And that's what led me to go into the New York Times. That's when I called Liz and said, I want to go into the New York Times. And that's when she was like, okay, can we cover you even if you don't go forward? So I went into the New York Times off the record. When I went to the New York Times, it was to tell them my story because I wanted them to keep digging to find someone who would go on the record. But I wanted them to know how real this was. And then I left and thought, great, hopefully they'll stick with that story and leave me out of it. And then, of course, you know, they called back and said they'd found 3 more women, all of whom were Black. Because that was the other thing. I was like, I'm not going to be out here as the only Black woman standing next to a bunch of white women, with all due respect, taking down a Black icon. No, I'm not here for that. That's not me. No, like, I don't want to get kicked out of the Black table. The Black table is my favorite table. I want to be able to sit at the Black table for the whole rest of my life. That's my favorite table. Okay. And I didn't want to be kicked out. So, you know, I went into the New York Times off the record, but it was filmed because the person who made the introduction is also the person who'd introduced me to the filmmakers. It was just this serendipitous thing. And then they told me the other women that they'd spoken to, I thought they were going to say they'd been inappropriately touched or groped. And then they said 2 of them had been raped. That's when it really started to become clear to me that I had been trapped, that I had been lured into his apartment to get a demo that was really never a demo. And that really angered me. And then I was told that the other women that they'd spoken to were aware that I existed. They didn't know who I was, but they were aware that there was another woman who was also a rape victim. I'm a victim and a survivor, by the way. I don't skip victim because I have compassion for the part of myself that was harmed. I'm not just like, I'm a survivor. No. I'm also a victim. I was harmed, and I don't want to be like distancing myself from that part of myself. Like, she's not good enough for me. The girl who lost the fight on the bed is also me, And so I felt like I had to come forward because these other women needed me to come forward. The New York Times was like, the story is stronger with you in it. And we kind of need all of you for it. It's just going to be stronger that way. And I was still considering it. And then I talk about in the film a couple of other things that pushed me over the edge. And then I decided, okay, again, it wasn't so much that I wanted to do it, but I couldn't not do it. It's like one of those things where if you never know, then you're fine. But if you know that you could have been the person that could have made the difference, then you're going to have to live with that for the rest of your life. And I was like, I don't know if I can live with that. It's like, I don't know. I think of like, I don't know, I keep saying this and nobody gets the reference, but I feel like when Aaliyah says, is it your go or is it my go? I was like, oh my God, it's my go.
I know that reference.
Thank you. And it's not about Aaliyah. It's about that. Is it your go? Or I was like, damn, it's my go. It's like in a board game, you're like, it's my go. Or like, I think of like climbing to the top of a diving board and you're like the high dive and you're like all brave going up the ladder and there's like a long line of kids in front of you. And then it's like, oh my God, it's my go. I had that feeling like it's really my go. I can't climb back down the ladder. I have to jump. Right. And I jumped. And, that's really what I've been sort of doing for the past, 2 years. I've just been falling in some way and also trusting the fall and no longer trying to manage the script of my life story where I like scribbled out the rape victim part of my story because I didn't want to be I just was like, well, I'll write that out. And I now realize that I was basically picking up Russell's bloody gloves every day, that I didn't include that in my story. I was cleaning up his crime scene. And I'm not going to do that anymore. So it's been scary. I paid a price. My marriage it didn't end over it. My marriage had already failed, but it was the final argument in my marriage. I'm now divorced and but I'm free.
There are multiple tragedies here from my vantage point. I mean, of course, the inciting incident is obviously your sexual assault. But then you have all of these other considerations because of the history of white supremacy in this country, because of the unfairness we know that Black men are subject to. I mean, the fact that you can't just focus on your healing, the fact that you have to juggle all of these things, like, it's truly, truly sad.
But that's also the story of Black women in America, right? We don't ever have the luxury of just doing one thing. We always have to walk and chew gum at the same time. And we're lucky if it's as easy as walking or chewing gum. I mean, the level of things that we have to do to there's this amazing, is it Fran Lebowitz quote where she says that, the amount of work that Black people have to do to just get to the beginning where so many white people start, the struggle that preceded the starting line for so many of us is just so different. So I don't, I'm not going to sing a sad song. I've been a Black woman and a Black girl my whole life, in spite of how I appear. I have 8 Black great-grandparents, 4 Black grandparents. We were all descendants of slaves. None of them could vote. They all went to segregated schools if they went to school. And so, I mean, my family was mixed in the 1800s, maybe like 1904, I think is the last white relative that I'm aware of. I've never met one of those people. So this is just sort of the story of being Black in America. And so I'm not, it is, every choice I think we make as Black women, we filter through the lens of, okay, here's what I would like to do. Now, here's what I feel like I have to do when I add the layer of my Blackness and the layer of my womanness. And then I put them together. Now my choices are sort of winnowed down to a different set of smaller choices or a different set of obstacles I have to overcome to have the same opportunity that somebody else has. I mean, that's just sort of our story. And that's why when I talk about what happened to me in the music industry, I start the clock in 1619, not in 1995. I start the clock with the objectification and the sexual violence perpetrated on Black women by white men that Russell Simmons mimicked in his anti-Black attempt to mimic the oppressors. And so that's where I start the clock.
Yeah. So, I hate that you had to lay out your genealogical tree, but people were going to ask. I know people are going to ask on this platform. But that brings me to, at the end of the film, Salai Abrams, another one of Russell's victims, and I actually, my lawyer said I need to use the word alleged, so we'll say, because he denies these allegations, he says that he was a womanizer and his behavior was typical of the time, but that he is not a serial rapist. So another woman who alleges that Russell Simmons sexually assaulted her, Salai Abrams, mentions at the end of the film that as light-skinned women, that she feels a certain kind of responsibility to be out in front because you guys are going to have privilege in the way that you're received and the way that your stories are believed versus the way that a darker skinned woman might be perceived. Do you also feel that kind of responsibility?
How do you tell your story in front of a national forum? But at the same time, realizing the privilege, like looking at us, we're all light-skinned, we're all conventionally attractive. The fact that our story has been told is a privilege. It shouldn't be a privilege. Every woman's story deserves to be heard.
100%. I love the book, The Bluest Eye. And I think about Pecola Breedlove, if I'm saying her name correctly. I only read it, so I don't know how it's pronounced. And a survivor. She's a survivor. And I feel that it's important to be clear about the fact that while my bluest eye didn't protect me, it's sort of like I'm a proxy for like a white ideal of beauty, but I'm vulnerable as a Black woman, but it's sort of like I'm fetishized kind of because of that white ideal, but then I'm sort of also vulnerable because I don't have the back of like being a white person, right? So it's sort of like I'm still exposed to the violence, but I also understand that in this moment, in this sort of place where I found myself, I'm very clear about the fact that in the context of the white gaze in the mainstream media, I can be heard, I can be seen. They might listen to me because they can relate, which is totally uncool and racist and all of that. But if I can use that to hold space, to then widen the lens and insist that the conversation include all of us as Black women and girls, and frankly, men and boys, because our men and our boys are harmed in this way too. R. Kelly didn't fall out of the sky being R. Kelly. Okay, and I'm sure Russell Simmons didn't either. And I would like to break the cycle, not just to save more Black women and girls from being victims. I want to save more Black men and boys from being perpetrators. Because what a prison that is. What a tragedy that is. For someone with the talent of R. Kelly, the genius of R. Kelly, of Russell Simmons, for their legacies, for their lives to be ultimately destroyed from the inside out by this deviant, awful, abusive behavior. I want to end it all for my men, my boys, my sisters, all of us. And I believe that because I present in a way that lands for white people, that they might listen to me, and I can just, while they have my attention, y'all may have thought this was going to be one movie, about some like Vanessa Williams looking chick and some rap mogul, but actually, because these filmmakers actually were so curious and they're really diligent and we really built this bond over the course of making this film. No, we're going to widen the lens and we're going to talk about Pecola Breedlove. We may not say her name. We're going to talk about all of us. And maybe you will give us the 90 minutes that's really a fraction of the time it takes to tell a 400-year story. But maybe I can get 90 minutes because of how I look and how I present, which is unfair. But maybe y'all won't watch Surviving R. Kelly. But maybe you'll watch this and maybe you'll hear me. And now can you please go watch that too? Can you please understand that I'm part of this continuum, this story that affects all of us, and it's harming us. It is literally harming us. I talk in the film about the condemned cell where the enslaved Black men who attempted to defend the enslaved Black women, who, by the way, were not women. The average age of the Black women in the slave trade was 15. Okay, so let's start with that. When they were being raped, the Black men who attempted to defend them were taken to a cell with no window, where they couldn't even stand up, and they were left there to die. And I visited that cell and I saw the scratch marks from the Black men who attempted to defend the Black women are still on the walls. And what I would like to do is to unlock the condemned cell that is now in our mind, that allows Black men to look away from the pain and the suffering and the abuse and the objectification and the sexualization of Black women. That is a remnant, a vestige of slavery. And I would like for us to find a way to turn to each other and lift each other up. And, you know, I think that in some way we're doing the work of white supremacy by platforming Russell Simmons, by making excuses for R. Kelly. We're doing their work. We're helping them. I think Black men supporting Black women is really the cheat code for solving our sort of piece of playing into their hands. And so that was a long answer to my light privilege and how I see it. You know, I grew up as the child of local politicians in DC when it was a predominantly Black city. I'm not sure if it still is. I don't want to think about that because that's a whole nother, it was 80% Black when I grew up there. And, you know, my family took very seriously our responsibility to try to make the city a better place, just a more productive place, and to make it a place where we had ownership, where we retained as much ownership as possible in whatever DC was going to become. And that's just in my DNA. That's just how I was raised. And so I believe in using whatever privilege I have to hold space for my people. And I understand that one of those feathers, or what do you call it, like quivers in my bow, is the fact that they might see me. They might see me. And it's a damn shame they don't see all of us. But okay, if they're gonna see me, then I hope they hear me. And I hope that I can expand the conversation to include all of us.
Was it eerie at all for you to meet his other alleged victims and look around and see that y'all kind of favor, like, Russell has that type?
It's deep. I mean, well, the first part is that knowing I wasn't alone was like, I mean, it's like the cellular composition of my body changes when I think about it. For 22 years, I thought it was just me. Why did he do that to me? I just couldn't understand it. And also, like, because I never talked about it, it also becomes this mind, it just like, you feel like you're crazy. You know, you were the only one in the room. I mean, I told my friend, she found me in the shower in all my clothes. So she asked me what happened. I told close friends in the days after. So they knew. And I'm actually amazed years later how many of them remember the details, you know, the naked and no condom, like all of that. But when I first connected with Sherry, she's the first one I connected with. I was going to DC for the holidays and I was supposed to leave the next day. And I literally wanted to push the trip back and jump on a train and go to Harlem and just hug her, because I was just like, oh my God, we're not alone. Like, just, you're real. You're real. And then I met Jenny. I actually met Jenny before I met Sherry. And we met in a restaurant, and the waiter had to bring us tissue boxes. We just kept weeping. And we would like finish each other's sentences. We would say something about that night or that room, and then I would finish her sentence and she would just start bawling. It was just like, oh my God. And so I think the first thing was just the feeling of I'm not alone. And then I met Salai. And then I started to be like, and then Salai sent a picture of what she looked like in the 90s. And I was like, whoa. Like, whoa. Yeah.
And to underscore, another thing that struck me while I was watching the film was when y'all are recounting your stories, the stories are so similar. The details are so similar, down to tactics, where he was standing, what he was naked, like very, very creepy. Very,
and
very.
The way that he pinned our arms together, like with his, like our wrists, that he grabbed us. It's almost like, I mean, I really believe he must have learned some wrestling move, because it was like this swift, like jiu-jitsu, I don't know, like, and we all had that experience. And also the false pretenses that he used for every single one of us to get us alone, either in his apartment or in Sherry's case, to look at his new office, to talk business. You know, it's just amazing. And we're all in different places in terms of our healing. And so for some of us, we talk and we can just sort of, and we're all sort of sisters in this very odd way, but we also are triggers for each other. So for some of us, we kind of can't be that close. We maybe send each other emojis to check in, but we don't try to engage because it's a little too much. In other cases, we're really like, you know, Sherry and I just talk, you know what I mean? Like, it just depends on where we are in our journey and what we represent for each other. So there's also that part of it that's complicated. But yeah, it's just still something I'm still unpacking. It's just spooky. It's creepy. It's like he had a type, and it's weird to think you're just like a type, you know, it's weird. It's weird.
Yeah, so let's move on to Oprah. You alluded to Oprah's initial involvement in this documentary, and I think that's how a lot of us kind of found out that this was going to be made, when she signed on to be a producer, and that this was going to be distributed on Apple TV Plus. I think that's the name of the platform. But then a day before, I believe, or maybe a couple days before it was supposed to premiere at Sundance, was it one day or more than that?
15 days.
Okay, so a couple of weeks before this was set to premiere at Sundance, Oprah came out and said that she was no longer going to be attaching her name to it. She went on TV and said it was because of creative differences with the directors of the film. And then later, she actually came out and said that she felt like some of your testimony in the film, your recollection of events, she felt like there were some inconsistencies. And I wonder how hurtful that was for you.
That was excruciating. That was deeply, deeply painful for me. It was almost like my greatest fear in doing this in the first place played itself out in the way the most powerful Black woman, maybe in the world, certainly in entertainment, was standing up for us. And then the very thing I feared, which was this charge of disloyalty to the race and of abandonment of Black men, you know, in light of all of the ways they're falsely accused and vilified, was somehow the rationale for attacking her. So that was painful. Watching her be attacked was painful. I never met her. I was told, meet her sort of at some point. She was going to interview me maybe. And I don't know, that's what I was told. I have no idea really. So I was devastated to watch her take that incoming. I really hated to see that, but I never, ever in a million years thought she would leave. You know, it was like this fairy godmother. I thought we'd been rescued. And I actually, at one point, when she was being attacked by 50 Cent and Russell on social media, I downloaded the picture of Gayle King sitting there while R. Kelly attacks her, and I made it my screensaver on my phone to reassure myself, these women are not going anywhere. You couldn't be in better hands. And, you know, and then we found out on January 10th at, I think it was 6:20 p.m., that she was exiting the project and she was taking Apple TV with her. And I was in the fetal position in my apartment for 3 days. I mean, it was literally my worst fear was playing itself out with this woman I admired and this man that I had admired. And I just couldn't believe that it was coming down to this. And so we went to Sundance terrified, you know, Sherry, Salai, and myself with the filmmakers. You know, and we stood there not knowing if the film would ever be seen by anyone beyond the, 500 people in the theater at the premiere. And yes, I did read that she said there were inconsistencies in my story. I have no idea what she's talking about. I mean, I literally have no idea what she's talking about. You know, the story the New York Times wrote 2 years ago was a 3,000-word piece that not a soul has refuted in 2+ years. You know, I have, you know, friends that I told the story who told the exact same story to the New York Times 22 years later, some of whom I hadn't spoken to in over a decade. You know, those friendships don't always last. People move to LA, they move wherever, they leave the industry. I left the industry. You know, some of those people were not my close friends anymore. And I just gave their names to the New York Times and, you know, hope that, you know, for the best. I didn't know if they even remembered, you know, and they did. And they were exactly consistent with what I said. And so it's hurtful. I also continue to admire her. I continue to regard her as a hero in the sense that what she's achieved against all of the odds is remarkable. And what she's done with her platform is remarkable. You know, the Breonna Taylor billboards, the 26 Breonna Taylor billboards are amazing. And, you know, Breonna Taylor on the cover of her magazine is amazing. And, you know, I don't understand it. I, you know, don't spend time thinking about things I can't control. You know, I believe things happen for a reason, and I had to discover that I don't need to hide behind Oprah Winfrey, and Sherry doesn't need Oprah Winfrey, and Salai doesn't need Oprah Winfrey, and no survivor needs Oprah Winfrey. All we need is ourselves and our truth, and a little bit of courage, and a little bit of faith, and that's enough. And I don't know that I would have discovered that about myself if it had played itself out the way I so desperately hoped that it would. And so here I am, and I'm on HBO Max with my fellow survivors and the incredible wise women in the film, you know, as we call them, you know, Kimberly, Crenshaw, and Joan, and Kierna, and Shanita, and they're just amazing. And HBO Max has been an incredible partner. I mean, they're really genuinely committed to the film, but also to us and to the importance of this film to the conversation about Black liberation and systemic racism. You know, they made the film available for free because they think it's important for people to see it. And I'm so glad that I'm in such a good home, in such good hands. And so I just do believe that things happen for a reason. And I don't understand what happened with Oprah, but you know, she's a businesswoman and she's got to make the choices that make sense for her. And that's how she's become successful. And, you know, it is, as Trump would say, it is what it is.
Yeah. You know, we're not going to make this about Oprah, but it definitely struck me as a little strange to go on television and say, I'm going to take my name off of this project. I still believe the survivors. I still believe the survivors. I still believe them. You didn't bully me. But then, I don't know. And then there's the question of Ava DuVernay's involvement with that. But what I wanted to note was, in 2017, there was this New York Times article that we have talked about, and I understand the kind of journalistic rigor that goes into making articles like this, that the stuff that they have to do before legal at the time says that a story like that can be published, the digging, the fact checking, the references, it's a little odd.
It's no joke. Like, literally, I met with them, I told them my story. You know, I left. They then asked for names of people that I had told. I gave them the name of my friend who was staying on my couch. I gave them the name of a friend I'd called that night, a guy, who I'd called to ask if we should call the police. I gave them the name of a friend I told a few days later because he was an intern for my mentor, and I'd gone in to talk to my mentor, and he was in the office, and I let him stay in, and I told the story. I gave them the names of a few friends that I'd lost touch with. And then those friends called me and they said, I spoke to the New York Times, and the first 10 minutes of the conversation was, what kind of person is Drew Dixon? Before they even asked me anything about the facts of the event, they asked me, first of all, what kind of person is she? And, this was not, a no risk proposition. Some of these friendships did not end well. In some cases it's like, you're friends with somebody and then it doesn't work out and you grow apart, or maybe they didn't not end well, but I wasn't like, you grow apart and you have no idea what people that aren't friends with you anymore, close friends with you anymore, are going to say all of those years later. And I'm just grateful that they said good things. I'm blessed that I have such good friends, that the friendships were durable enough that without me checking, that they said good things. They vouched for my character. I think by the time the film was delivered to Sundance, they had 60 people they'd interviewed about me over the course of my life, the filmmakers. I think the New York Times interviewed 9 people. The second time I met with the reporters at the Times, by the time when I decided to go on the record, they'd actually mapped out a timeline of my life. They knew exactly when the show soundtrack had come out. I didn't remember when it came out. I just said that I remembered it was still at the top of the charts the night of the assault, because we talked about that on the sidewalk. And that was one of the things he sort of used to lure me upstairs. He said, you've got the #1 record in the country. It was the #1 R&B album in the country. But for them, that was a big deal, for a rap record to be the #1 R&B album. And so they knew how long it had been the #1. It was 7 weeks. So that's how they were able to pinpoint the window of when it had happened. They'd done all of this due diligence. They knew that, they knew everything about me, and so you can't like pull the wool over the eyes of the New York Times. Like, that's just not how it goes. You're exposing yourself to like a full, body cavity check, basically, of your character before they'll even move forward with the story. And so, it's not, I don't know. Again, I don't know what the inconsistencies were. I don't know what that was about. I'd love to know. I'd actually love to be asked, because I'd love to address it, because I don't think there are any. And maybe there's a misunderstanding. Maybe she was informed by somebody that there were, and I'd love to be asked. I would love that.
So you mentioned Russell Simmons, his appearance on The Breakfast Club, and something I thought was a little odd was during that. Well, I found the whole thing to be odd. I found the tone of it to be odd, but there was lots of things that he said during that interview that I thought were a little bit strange. He mentioned that he had several conversations with Oprah in the hopes that she would withdraw her support for the film. She ultimately ended up doing that, but Oprah has not confirmed whether or not that's the reason or whatever. She acknowledges that he reached out to her. But, if those conversations happened, does that strike you as a little strange?
It's disappointing, because, part of what's so hard is when your abuser is so powerful, they're just people he can reach that I can't reach. I don't have her phone number. I've never had her phone number. I can't go and basically run around and create a narrative in all of these important rooms with all of these important people to sort of create a barrier between myself and the truth, like Russell Simmons can. I just have my truth and hope that my truth isn't smothered. That's all I've got. I don't have all of those. I don't have those phone numbers. I don't have those. I can't reach those powerful people. And so the fact that whether or not it impacted her decision or not, it's hurtful to me that he was given an audience, he was given the platform to campaign against us with her, knowing that we couldn't answer. We weren't even given the opportunity to counter. We weren't given equal time. That's hurtful. I can't compete with that. I just, I have an article in the New York Times. You can read it. You can call me. I can tell you what happened. You can call my friends. I don't know what to say. And so that's that. Yeah. I mean, I'm going to just accept her, you know, explanation of her decision to leave and take her at her word that it wasn't because Russell Simmons called her multiple times, which he said he did on the Breakfast Club. Maybe that's unrelated, but it certainly makes me feel like we were in some ways bullied all over again. Like Russell basically tackled us and basically sort of, I don't know, overpowered us again. It felt like I was being overpowered by Russell again. He had more muscle than I had again. That's what it felt like.
Yeah. Wow, this hour has flown by. Okay, so we're gonna wrap up on so going back to that, Russell Simmons on The Breakfast Club, which I really found to be disgraceful. I felt like the tone of that interview was so friendly and so light and so jovial for somebody who has been accused by multiple people of sexual assault. I think there's now 20 women who've come out and said that he has been inappropriate with them sexually. I mean, this is a potentially violent criminal, allegedly violent criminal. Didn't make any sense to me. So I feel like that has happened a couple of times. It also happened on Drink Champs where they just invited him on like nothing had happened. Right. Do you feel like Black media that caters to people who love hip hop has failed victims of sexual assault as you're trying to get this story out?
I feel that many Black media outlets and many powerful Black people with voices that matter have failed, not me, but future generations of young Black people, Black women, Black girls, Black survivors who are watching this intently and reading the room and making decisions right now in real time about whether or not they will come forward with their story, whether it's publicly, whether it's within a family, whether it's within a school, within a company, within a religious environment, a sports team, whatever it is, they're watching this. And the silence and the coddling of Russell Simmons is teaching them something dangerous. The same thing I learned from the way the Black community responded to Anita Hill and Desiree Washington, I believe is happening right now in the way vulnerable Black people who need to be protected and respected, what they are extracting from the way we are platforming and protecting or just being complicit by omission in what we don't say about Russell Simmons. And I understand that Black people have very few heroes to spare. When we reach these upper echelons of power and wealth and influence, it is a victory for all of us in many ways. And, it is something that, opens doors, not just figuratively, but literally. It creates opportunities for other Black people to be employed, other Black people to create wealth, other Black people to be seen and heard as artists or writers. Anytime one of us gets in the room, the idea is hopefully it means more of us will follow, right? And so, the idea of losing somebody who represents that, I understand why it's hard, but I also think it's ironic that they had Russell Simmons on a program talking about Black Lives Matter and a conversation about pulling down statues of Confederate soldiers who raped and brutalized our ancestors. And they're platforming a living, breathing rapist of Black women who were watching that show. Like, why are we platforming any rapists? Tear all of the statues down. It's an insult for all of us as Black people to have to live in a country that canonizes our abusers. And it's an insult to all of us as survivors of Russell Simmons to live in a society that canonizes him. And it sends a dangerous message. I'm 49. I feel very blessed in my life. I feel like I've come a long way in my healing, but there are vulnerable people, young Black people, in particular women and girls, but not just women and girls, watching the way this is playing out. And it terrifies me that they are taking the message from this, that they won't be supported, that they will never be saved. And I just fear that we're going to lose another generation and we're not going to break the cycle. And that is a loss.
Yeah. Okay, final question. What would you like to happen to Russell Simmons?
You know, I know it sounds odd. I don't think about him that much. One of the best things about coming forward is that I don't think about myself in relationship to what he did to me anymore. I realized that convincing myself that I'd moved on, but avoiding revealing what he did was actually giving him power over me every single day, that I had to remember not to reveal that in any story I ever told about the music industry. And now I can just live my life and tell my truth and speak about my past and my professional achievements without having to think 10 steps ahead and make sure I don't expose him. So I'm free of him, and I really like being free of him. And he lives in a prison that I can't imagine, because he has to wake up every day and tell a lie. He's got to wake up every day and tell a lie to his daughters. That must be exhausting. And what I really hope is that he's not harming other people. You know, that's what I worry about. And I think more about the safety and well-being of survivors. And I try to put my energy there, and I try not to think about Russell Simmons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Do you have like 5 more minutes? Because we didn't even get to talk about LA Reid, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So this is what is so crazy to me about your story and about Silai's story is not only were you sexually assaulted by this really powerful man, Russell Simmons, you move on, you get a different job, you're moving up, still making hits, right? And then you work with LA Reid, who is another super famous record executive, very, very famous writer. And he also is very sexually inappropriate with you. He also sexually harasses you to the point where you say, oh, I'm done with this industry.
Yes. So that was devastating. I thought I was planning to quit the industry after what happened with Russell. I quit my job. You know, I was planning to I had this vision that I would move to Europe and pick tomatoes. I don't know why that seemed like a good solution, but then I was like, I can't afford a flight to Europe. Where would I stay? I don't have any money. I have a lease. I can't break my lease. I have a student loan I'm still paying. I have a Macy's credit card I opened to buy these sheets. I really can't just leave. And then I started to get phone calls from major labels because of the show soundtrack. And one of them was Clive Davis. And I met with, one of them was Arista. And I ultimately met with Clive, and we hit it off immediately because he's a music man. And I had a great run with him. And I don't think it's a coincidence that part of the reason I was safe and productive there is that he's now out of the closet, so I'm not revealing anything, is a gay man. And, I was actually the only, woman in the A&R department. I was the only person under 30. I was the only Black person. And, 4 of the people in the department were gay. The other one was an older white man. And so, it was just strictly business. And I was able to really have the best run of my career there. And that's where I introduced Lauryn Hill to Aretha Franklin, and Wyclef to Whitney and Carlos Santana. And, I signed Q-Tip to a solo deal and Brand Nubian to a reunion album. And, I had a great run, and I brought in the song for Deborah. And then Clive was ousted by BMG as the head of Arista. And I was planning to go with him to his new label, J Records. And then actually Clive and I got in an argument about the Q-Tip album. He was so distracted with his new label, J Records, that he wasn't focused on Breathe and Stop, which is Q-Tip's single at the time. And I really needed him to chase that record because Vibrant Thing was on a compilation, and so it wasn't selling our album. And I was really frustrated, and I didn't want to be sort of tucked behind Clive Davis for 5 more years. I felt like it was time for me to venture out. I was like, well, if Puffy can do it, why can't I do it? What do these guys have that I don't have? I can hear just as well as they can. My track record of making iconic hits is crazy. So I set up a label called Possum. I signed an artist named Alice Smith, and I was basically kind of going to run down the clock for 18 months with LA Reid and then start Possum. And Ellie and I had known each other since 1993. When I was a publisher at Zomba Music before Def Jam, I had crashed Outkast's first mastering session at the Hit Factory. I'd listened to the LaFace Christmas sampler, Player's Ball was on it. I was obsessed with that snippet. I found out that the album was being mastered at the Hit Factory. I snuck in. I introduced myself. I said I'm a publisher at Zomba and I'm interested in the publishing for Organized Noise because I think Outkast publishing was already gone. And Ellie Reed like comes in and was like, who are you? Like, why are you here? Like, how do you even know Outkast exists? And you're like from New York and they haven't even put out anything beyond a snippet. And I was like, oh, my bad. And he's like, wait, no, that's impressive that you even found them. You can hear the album. So I stayed and he was with Rosie Perez actually. And I listened to the whole album with Rico Wade from Organized Noise. And I was like, oh my God, I got to hear Players Ball, the whole entire album, or what was it? Southern Playalistic Cadillac, you know, the album for the first time in the mastering session. And then over the years when I would run into LA, he was like, I know you, you're the girl who snuck into the Outkast session and you really have good taste. And so when I ended up at Arista and he walked into his like first LaFace meeting with Babyface and himself to play music for Clive, he was like, what are you doing here? I was like, oh, I just started working here. And he's like, are you serious? So then he started inviting me to all the LaFace mastering sessions because he mastered pretty much everything with Herb Power at the Hit Factory. And so I was there for, you know, the TLC mastering sessions. I actually fought with him and insisted No Scrub should be the single because the single was supposed to be this record called Bad at Being Good or Good at Being Bad or something. And I was like, oh my God, no, it's the hanging out the side of your passenger, the side of your passenger's ride is that one. You know, and so, you know, we got to be friends because, you know, he trusted my ears and, you know, it was all good. Like, and he and Bass would say to me, they would, you know, I would see them all the time at functions because LaFace was a partner, you know, of Arista. And I was like the only Black person in the A&R department. So, you know, Clive always wanted my opinion on the LaFace records and the Bad Boy records and the Dallas Austin Rowdy records too. And, you know, Face and LA would say, we're really impressed. You're making like great Black records in the building. Like it used to be that, you know, Clive made Whitney and Ace of Base and stuff like that. And we made the Black records at Bad Boy and LaFace. And now you're making like Nobody's Supposed to Be Here and A Rose Still a Rose. And so the point I'm making is LA and I had a great working relationship, like based on music and mutual respect. I knew his wife when they were dating. I would sit next to them at events at Clive's house, you know? And so I thought, this is a layup. Like I'll work for LA. I'll run down my contract. I won't sign for 5 years. And, you know, I will start this label in 18 months with Alice Smith as my first artist. And I'll learn from L.A. Reid, like how bad could this be? And then it just turned. As soon as I said to Clive that I was going with L.A., he was furious. It was like a Devil Wears Prada, Miranda Priestley scene where I was supposed to be on the list for Miranda Priestley's company, which was Clive's company. And then I took myself off the list and like he was Miranda Priestley and I was like the enemy. He was very upset. And Ellie knew that he was very upset. And now I realized that Ellie knew that at that point I was a sitting duck. I had I had burned the bridge. And Ellie Reid even asked me at one point, he came in my office and asked me if I'd sued Russell Simmons for sexual harassment. He said he'd heard that. And I said, I'm not going to discuss that. And it was weird. And I think he realized that at that point, I basically was painted into a corner. And so the relationship just started to change. You know, I'd already signed Toya. I signed this artist named Toya from St. Louis very early in my L.A. Reid Arista sort of, you know, tenure. And that was okay. Like things were still pretty cool. But then he just started to get weird. Like he wanted me to wear skirts and heels every day. So I started to wear jeans and those like Birkenstock clogs that men hate. Like even in the winter with socks. I was like, oh, guys hate the clogs. I'm wearing those. But I would like have my like, you know, Manolo boots under my desk for like when I went out at night on a date or whatever. I was like, okay, I'm gonna be cute on my own time, but in the building, I'm going with the clogs, you know? So, you know, I kept trying to like redirect again. And then it just kept getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And he just got more and more punitive. He killed Toya's album. You know, that was the first time he asked me to come to his hotel. He wanted me to come to his hotel to listen to Toya's album. And he kept calling me and calling me and calling me. And I kept just letting it go to voicemail. And then in a staff meeting, the promotion staff was going on and on and on about Toya's record, I Do, being the #1 urban record in the country, which meant contemporary hit urban. And that it was testing really well. The call out research was really good, meaning it was like actually like a bona fide hit, and that they couldn't wait for the next single because this was going to be a big artist. We were going to break a big star. And he said, you know what? And he like looked at me and he said, I listened to Toya's album in my hotel room last night. I don't like it anymore. We're not going to chase this artist. Cross her off the agenda. Take out your pens, draw a line through it. It's over. And he just killed her career just like that. And that was the beginning. And then I auditioned Kanye. And then I tried to audition John. And that's when I was like, okay, so I get it. I get it. If I don't play this game, I can't do my job. And I didn't even have the physical strength to hang in there long enough to run down the 18 months and just start possum. I let Alice go. I ripped up her contract. And I just was like, you know what I should do? I should do the thing that I probably should have done 10 years ago, the thing everybody expected me to do, go to grad school, have a, safe, bougie life. I'm just being honest with you. Everybody thinks that's who I am. So let me just be that. I don't know why I thought I was going to like be the one to be the woman who was going to like, build this music empire that had a different point of view, that made a different type of record, overwhelmingly Black records or Black informed records through the lens of a woman. I just felt like I was a fool, and I called it. And Ellie Reed was really the straw that broke the camel's back for me.
It's such a shame. But also, I remember that I Do record. I don't know if it was like on Radio Disney or whatever I was watching, 106 in Park. I don't know, but it was a hit. Like I remember it.
It was a banger. It was.
So, anyways, thank you. Man, this is such and so do we know where, her career got killed for something that she wasn't even.
Exactly. Right. Thank God John got a deal. Thank God Kanye got a deal, but Toya's career was ruined. There's an artist I signed at Def Jam named Kali Ranks, whose career was derailed, and he didn't even know why until he read the New York Times article because somebody forwarded it to him. 22 years later, he was like, oh, that's why Drew abandoned me in the middle of my album. So it's not just me. There are other casualties of this beyond me. There are artists who suffered. And yeah, it's, I had an assistant, this, Latina woman, Black Latina, my girl, who I was trying to also help get her shot. Brilliant, and I couldn't help her. I believed in nurturing people. My intern did go on, one of my interns, to become a vice president of A&R, but I was trying to open the door for artists and executives, and I'm hurt, not just for myself, but for everybody who was collateral damage of this like completely ridiculous, unnecessary, toxic masculinity, really.
Drew, thank you so much for taking some time to talk to me. Thank you for being so generous and so candid. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. It means so much to me to be remembered and asked, and thank you.
Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Leave a comment down below. Support Drew in her new endeavors. There's going to be a link to a Spotify playlist that she created in the description box of this video. Click it, listen to it, support this woman like a true genius. Like, this is not fake talent. This is real talent. And so go ahead and support. Thank you to the patrons. Thank you to the members. Your support keeps this thing going. Buy some merch, sign up for the email newsletter. We're still in a pandemic. Social distance if you can. Stay your ass at home if you can. My God, wear a mask. That's it. I'll talk to you later. Bye.